I don't give a fuck about what a person's personal convictions are when they are at the precipice of slaughter. Okay? Like it's ridiculous. Bombs that drop in Gaza do not avoid gay Palestinians, do not avoid women in Palestine, women in Gaza. They kill all. You understand? This video charts the rise of Hezbollah. Really informative given the current context. Yeah. Profile, who is Hassan Nasrallah? Let's take a look at this video. This will allow you to understand what happened last time Israel invaded Lebanon, by the way, in the potential eve of a possible invasion of Lebanon again. I think that posted that Israel is preparing a response by Lebanon, including an attempt to invade the north, not Israel preparing to invade the northern border. Oh, okay. Okay. My apologies. The Twitter translate function is broken for once. But here, let's watch.
هي مسألة غير قابلة للنقاش ولا المساومة ولا لإعادة النظر ولا للتفكير ولا للتأمل أيا تكن الأثمان وأيا تكن تضحيات.
Hassan Nasrallah has been the dominant leader of Hezbollah for nearly 3 decades. He is seen by many as a resistance figure credited with driving Israel from southern Lebanon. But for others, he's a controversial militia leader whose command of Hezbollah has led to an escalation of conflict in Lebanon and the region.
By others, as in America and Israel.
Nasrallah? And how has Hezbollah evolved under his leadership? Nasrallah was born in 1960 to a working-class Shia family in an impoverished suburb in eastern Beirut. In 1975, during the Lebanese Civil War, he fled with his family to his ancestral home in southern Lebanon. There, he joined the Amal movement, a Shia paramilitary group once known as the Movement of the Deprived. Nasrallah was interested in theology and traveled to Najaf in Iraq for Quranic studies. But he was forced to return to the civil war in Lebanon, which now had grown larger and more complicated. In 1978, Israel's army invaded to root out Palestinian militants, and again in 1982, laying siege to Beirut and destroying large parts of the city. Nasrallah returned to the Amal movement to fight, becoming the group's commander in Bekaa Valley. During this time, Nasrallah became close with Abbas al-Musawi, an influential Shia cleric who had just co-founded a new group called Hezbollah, or Party of God. The group was formed with the backing of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard in response to Israel's invasion of Lebanon at the height of the war in 1982. Nasrallah was drawn in and soon left the Amal movement to enlist. By 1985, Hezbollah had formally declared its...
Hassan, can you cover the black journals with Trump? I did in the morning. First thing I covered.
...existence in an open letter outlining its identity and goals. It called continued to occupy a strip of southern Lebanon, deemed a security zone, totaling about 10% of the country's territory.
وقبل أن يسألنا الآخرون ماذا ستفعل.
You like to hype up these Middle Eastern militaries for some reason when it seems like we could drop a few aircraft carriers on them. Chat saying base of these people is ironic. This guy's so anti-women rights, anti-gay rights, anti-everything y'all stand for. Also, as an Iranian, the glorification of the Iranian regime in this chat is crazy. Brother, I don't think you understand. Okay? I don't give a fuck about what a person's personal convictions are when they are at the precipice of slaughter. Okay? Like, it's ridiculous. That's it. Bombs that drop in Gaza do not avoid gay Palestinians, do not avoid women in Palestine, women in Gaza. They kill all. You understand? People that are predisposed with survival from a genocidal entity are going to be hyper-focusing on survival instead of gay liberation at that moment. It's ironic that you are from the Iranian diaspora and don't recognize the hardening positions in your country, in your home nation, as a direct consequence of an incredibly violent coup that took place with Western influence, with Western backers, that set up a Western-aligned figurehead that tortured the shit out of your people, which then led to a incredibly fundamentalist retaliation against that. This has happened historically everywhere that America has meddled in the affairs of.
المقاومة الإسلامية إذا انسحب الإسرائيلي إلى الحدود الدولية المعترف بها، الحدود بين لبنان وفلسطين، وستبقى اسم هذه الحدود الحدود اللبنانية الفلسطينية. وبالنسبة إلينا لن يكون هناك يوم نقول فيه أو نعترف فيه بحدود لبنانية إسرائيلية.
In 1997, Nasrallah's son was killed during clashes with Israeli forces, fueling his standing as a champion of resistance against occupation in the eyes of his supporters. Hezbollah fought a successful campaign against Israel's occupation of Lebanon. And when Israel withdrew from southern Lebanon in 2000, ending an 18-year occupation, it was declared a victory for the resistance. In 2005, Lebanon's Prime Minister Rafiq al-Hariri, the country's most prominent Sunni figure at the time, was assassinated. He'd been a vocal critic of another regional player that had entered into the country, Syria, who sent thousands of soldiers to fight during the Civil War, but maintained a heavy military presence for nearly 3 decades. Many accused both Syria and Hezbollah of having clear motives to kill Hariri, something they both denied. His death would plunge Lebanon into turmoil yet again, and lead to a mass protest movement demanding Syria's withdrawal. Syria was a key political ally to Hezbollah, and although Syrian dominance in Lebanon diminished after the departure of its troops, the two maintained long-standing ties.
نؤكد أيضاً وبكل وضوح وقوفنا إلى جانب سوريا قيادة وشعباً في مواجهة الاستهداف الأمريكي الصهيوني لها ومحاولات الاقتصاص السياسي منها.
And after the 2005 political crisis, Hezbollah's influence had greatly increased. For the first time, it negotiated its way into government, and its members took up ministerial portfolios and began making strategic alliances with Lebanese factions.
لبنان كان دائما مقبرة للغزاة وسيكون مقبرة لأي غزاة جدد.
Nasrallah relied on his charisma to boost Hezbollah's public image. He shored up his support in the marginalized Shia community, the largest of Lebanon's 18 sects, through low-cost or free social welfare services that the Lebanese government failed to provide. Under his watch, Hezbollah built schools, hospitals, and charity organizations. When war broke out again between Israel and Hezbollah in 2006, the group positioned itself as Lebanon's strongest military force, capable of protecting people in southern Lebanon and helping them rebuild their villages.
نحن الآن نعلن انطلاق هذه الورشة في الضاحية في البقاع في الجنوب في كل المناطق.
Then its military failure in 2006 marked a series of long-awaited wins. Since the end of the war, Nasrallah rarely appeared in public for fear of being assassinated by Israel. He kept his movements secret and spoke at rallies through video links, but his ambition for Hezbollah did not waver. Following the war, the group led a series of protests to demand a greater share of power and the resignation of the US-backed government of Fouad Sanyura. In response, thousands of supporters camped out in central Beirut in a bid to overthrow the government. 2 years later, Hezbollah sympathizers and pro-government supporters clashed in Beirut after the government threatened to shut down Hezbollah's private telecommunications network. This time, the government caved and agreed to mediate.
Not gonna lie, I would revolt if they took my fiber optic cable network away as well. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know if they will bring this up in this fucking piece, but they have a fiber optic cable network. Hezbollah has fiber. I don't. Just something to think about.
Mediated talks in Doha that resulted in Hezbollah getting veto power over cabinet decisions.
وعلى المكشوف، ويمكن هيك شيء بالعالم كله ما فيه، انه واحد يطلع علنا وشفاف وصادق وبيقول للعالم كله نحن يا خيي على راس السطح موازنة حزب الله ومعاشاته ومصاريفه وأكله وشربه وسلاحه وصواريخه من الجمهورية الإسلامية في إيران.
Hezbollah's political and military alliance with Iran angered many Arab states, who feared Tehran's growing influence in the region. Nasrallah used this platform to rally support for Iran, and when war broke out in Syria, he sent his soldiers to fight alongside Bashar al-Assad and help him retain power.
إن وجود مقاتلين ومجاهدين على الأرض السورية هو وكما أعلنا في أكثر من مناسبة بهدف الدفاع عن لبنان والدفاع عن فلسطين وعن القضية الفلسطينية وعن سوريا حضن المقاومة وسند المقاومة. والجيش السوري منها يا جمال يا نصر الله يا جمال
Hezbollah's intervention enraged the Arab world. It also made them a target for reprisal attacks. In 2013 and 2014, Islamic State militants carried out more than a dozen car bombings in Shia areas in Lebanon, killing dozens of people and injuring hundreds. At home, many Lebanese blamed Hezbollah for exacerbating the situation in Syria and dragging the conflict across its borders. 1.5 million Syrian refugees fled to Lebanon, further straining the country's economy. In 2016, the Gulf Cooperation Council designated Hezbollah as a terrorist group and began to apply pressure on Lebanon's government to limit the group's power.
Damn, bro. The Gulf Cooperation Council doesn't have that kind of smoke for ISIS. Doesn't have that smoke for any number of different Islamist, fundamentalist, Wahhabist groups. Doesn't have that smoke for Israel. Only has the smoke for Hezbollah, Iran. Look, I'm Sunni, okay? I'm Turkish, I'm Sunni. This is not like a big distinction. It's not something that like normal people care about. I feel like Westerners know about the distinction and care about it more, or like think that this is like a legitimate difference when most normal Muslims just see themselves as Muslim. They don't see it as like Sunni Shia as a distinction. But ultimately, only one group of individuals. Hamas is Sunni as well, by the way. Palestinian resistance is Sunni. Palestinian people are Sunni. It is originally an Islamic charity, an Islamist charity that started as a Muslim Brotherhood cutout. Okay? Ultimately, the point I'm trying to make is this distinction is not as significant as the way that like it is presented in the Western world. And beyond that, it happens to be that like the entirety of the resistance is led by mostly Shia sects. The entirety of the resistance against Israel and America in the region. Or even if they're not Shia sects, oftentimes they are secular as well, or at least secular presenting. Some of these guys are not great. Some of these guys are horrifyingly bad. Okay? But ultimately, it goes from decent to bad to really unimaginably bad. And the really unimaginably bad part of that equation is almost always secretly or openly backed by Saudi Arabia, UAE, These guys that have openly and privately had maintained a relationship with Israel for quite some time at this point. Just saying.
Countries like Saudi Arabia, which had been a key investor in Lebanon, began to shun the country's leaders. They threatened them with sanctions if they didn't curtail the party's grip over domestic politics and their role as a proxy for Iran. This diplomatic pressure, alongside Lebanon's economic crisis, began to push the country towards a breaking point. With skyrocketing prices, a deadlock in parliament, and a failure of basic services like electricity and waste management, the Lebanese people had had enough of the ruling elite, Hezbollah.
Do they hate Israel, or do they hate Shias more than Israel? For Saudis, the answer is absolutely fucking yes. Not like Saudi population, but Saudi kingdom, Saudi monarchs, not even a question. Absolutely. Like that is the most common joke in the entirety of the Muslim world, is that like the Saudis would invade Israel if Israel declared to be Shia tomorrow.
Included. In 2019, mass anti-government protests swept across the country, uniting people across sectarian lines. Demonstrators filled the streets, demanding the government to resign and expressing anger at the ruling class for responding to Lebanon's economic crisis by introducing new taxes, including one on WhatsApp calls. Nasrallah spoke out against the new taxes, but rejected calls for resignations, calling it a waste of time. Protesters longing for a political change and better living conditions were angered by Nasrallah's stance.
خطاب السيد ما بيلبي المطالب والتطلعات اللي الناس نزلت لاجلها. حزب الله موجود بهذه الحكومه. اذا كان مشارك او ساكت عن الفساد واحد.
In August 2020, a massive explosion in Beirut's port sent a shockwave through the city. Entire neighborhoods were leveled, and more than 200 people were killed. But when investigations questioned the role of senior officials in ignoring the threats that led to the explosion, Nasrallah hit back, accusing the judge leading the case of political bias and calling for him to be replaced. Tensions escalated, fueled by the anger of the victims' families who condemned the repeated suspension of the inquiry as an attempt by politicians to evade justice. It culminated in a day of deadly clashes in Beirut.
Iran cut aid to Hamas for standing with the Syrian opposition. Iran and Hezbollah's conduct in Syria is the reason why people hate Iranian-backed militias, but in light of recent events, more and more people open up to the axis of resistance because of the lack of their government's action. Yeah. Also, there's been a little bit of back and forth on that front, but like considering that Israel also aligned with the fundies in Syria and even offered them protective cover, whereas Hamas itself literally executed ISIS leadership or ISIS militants in their own that tried to operate within Gaza, shows you that those allegiances are only momentary and can change at any given moment, with the ultimate prize or the ultimate goal being the eradication of the apartheid. I mean, you know, it's pretty funny to think about people accusing me of being like a Bashar al-Assad supporter. When, you know, I have had a militant that worked within the YPJ on my broadcast and am good friends with him. You know what I mean? That's right. Racial Jake, baby. So, okay, let's
That
finish this.
Hezbollah's power has been getting louder. The US and Gulf countries placed sanctions against the group's financing in a bid to curb its influence. But Nasrallah remained defiant.
نحن رحنا اعتدينا على السعودية ولا نحن هاجمنا السعودية. هؤلاء
Man, I feel like Israel hate being addressed as Zionist instead of Jewish. I mean, yes and no. It depends on who's listening. Internally, I mean, there is no, like, a lot of Zionists use Judaism as a shield, a simple defense mechanism.
هم كانوا شركاء في المؤامرة الكبرى وفي الحرب الكونية التي كانت تدمر المنطقة.
But depending on who you're talking to, if it's like a liberal Zionist, they will also yell at you for saying like, oh, well, how dare you say Israel's actions are responsible for anti-Semitism increasing in the Western world and all around the globe. Like, Israel is not, Israel is completely removed from Zionism, or rather, not Israel, sorry. Israel is completely removed from Judaism. And it's like, yeah, I know that. Okay, but Israel, you should probably take that up with Israel, because they keep fucking saying they're doing this for Judaism. You know?
نحن كان لنا شرف أن نقف في وجه هؤلاء القتلة المتآمرين على بلدنا وعلى شعوبنا وعلى دماء ورجال، على دماء وأعراض الرجال والنساء في لبنان.
With each crisis that befell Lebanon, Hassan Nasrallah was there to maneuver his party to ever-growing power. For 3 decades, he amassed a political and paramilitary force no one could challenge in Lebanon. A hero to his supporters and a dangerous menace to his adversaries. Now, he faces complex challenges: a country in economic meltdown, tensions with political rivals, and growing international pressure on Hezbollah to put down its arms.